ഗുഡ് മോർണിംഗ്. സിംഗപ്പൂർ ചോയ്സിലെ കാഴ്ചകളും വിശേഷങ്ങളും കാണാൻ എല്ലാവരും കാത്തിരിക്കുക എന്ന് എനിക്കറിയാം. അപ്പം നമുക്ക് സമയം കളയാതെ ഓരോ സെഗ്മെൻറ്റിലേക്കായി കടക്കാം. കഥകൾ കേൾക്കാൻ ആരൊക്കെയാണ് ഇഷ്ടമല്ലാത്തത്? കഥകൾ എന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ എനിക്കാദ്യം ഓർമ്മ വരുന്നത് എൻ്റെ അമ്മൂമ്മ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ എൻ്റെ അമ്മ ഞാൻ ചെറുപ്പത്തിൽ വെച്ച് പറഞ്ഞു തന്ന കഥകളാണ്. ഇപ്പോൾ ഈ ട്രഡീഷനൊക്കെ ഇങ്ങനെ കുറഞ്ഞു വരാണ്. എല്ലാവരും വളരെ ബിസിയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ കുട്ടികളൊക്കെ സ്വന്തമായാണ് ഇപ്പോൾ ബുക്സൊക്കെ വായിക്കുന്നത്. പക്ഷേ ഈ ട്രഡീഷൻ കീപ്പപ്പ് ചെയ്യുന്ന ഒരാളാണ് ഇന്ന് നമ്മുടെ ഗസ്റ്റ്.
பாட்டி கதை சொல்லுங்க பாட்டி. Grandmother, tell me a story. Grandmother, tell me a story.
Let's meet Ms. Kamini Ramachandran, the founder and director of Moon Shadow Stories. She has worked with a lot of institutions and organizations in Singapore and worldwide. Hi ma'am, welcome to Singapore Choice.
Thank you.
Why or how the storytelling? How did you come into this field?
I know everybody asks me this. My background is in English language and literature.
Okay.
And I've always loved reading, loved books, loved stories, loved to really escape into the world of the imagination. And as a child, my parents never, ever stopped me from buying books.
Okay.
And so I was a bookworm and I lived in that world. But what got me onto storytelling really is my maternal grandfather.
Okay.
My late grandfather was a very, very jovial and vivacious man who told me all the Indian epics and mythology and legends and folk tales and fables and fairy tales.
Okay, great.
So I spent a good number of my young, early childhood years staying with my grandparents.
Okay.
So he told me the entire Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Jataka, the Panchatantra, stories from his village in Kerala, stories about how he traveled on a ship and came to Malaya as it was then.
Okay.
Everything. And so I suppose, you know, when you study English language and literature and you come out of it and you're working with writing and editing and speech and drama, for me it was natural that at some point I would, you know, honor the stories that I inherited from him.
Okay.
And so when I became a parent myself, I started to tell these stories to my sons.
All right.
And then in their preschool, and then to anybody who wanted to hear me. And, you know, then I met Verena Tay and we collaborated together and, you know, set up Moon Shadow Stories.
Okay.
And began to really push storytelling as an art form and specifically for adult audiences, you know, so that we bring it back. Misconception that it's reading from a book and
Okay.
it's only for literacy and only for children. Of course, it has excellent applications for, you know, reading, vocabulary acquisition, for child development, but it's also an art form for adults.
Yes,
and so
for
I do
sure.
both. I do both
Okay.
of that.
So how did you come up with this name, Moon Shadow Stories?
Okay, so in Southeast Asia predominantly, we have wayang kulit, shadow puppetry.
Yeah.
So that's one of the oldest forms of storytelling in Asia
Okay.
and of
Yeah.
course in Southeast Asia. And the root stories come from the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And the moon is something that waxes and wanes and inspires people
Okay.
and has acted as a muse for anybody who is in the creative world. And so we put together these two Moon Shadow Stories.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who's your inspiration?
I have so many people and so many things that inspire me, and it keeps changing along the way and, you know, over the years. Of course, you know, my parents inspire me.
Okay.
My, you know, family inspires me. My grandfather, definitely. Things I read, things I see, children that I meet, people
Yeah.
in the audience, you know, things that happen in the world. So it's really hard to choose one person or one concept.
Storytelling. May I ask, like, who inspired you? Or
Who inspired me? It would still be back to my grandfather.
Yeah, okay.
But if you're talking about what kind of stories I'm drawn to or that really make me interested,
Yeah.
it would be the stories from Asia. It
All
would
right.
be specifically, you know, stories that are very much rooted in my background, my culture,
Yeah.
which is two. You know, I have the Indian roots in me. And I also have the Southeast Asian roots, having come from Malaysia and living in Singapore for so many years and speaking Malay fluently and growing up in this region.
Okay.
So that's what inspires me, is our myths and our legends and what's local and rich and Asian.
Okay. So your storytelling, do you always say in English or even the regional languages?
Predominantly, it's in English,
Okay.
simply because when you deal with a public audience, that is the universal language of communication when somebody engages your services.
Okay.
I have slipped in Malay as and when necessary, depending on the audience.
Okay.
And then, of course, a lot of Indian words and Sanskrit words and exclamations and sound effects, they come in as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So your audience, are they mostly children or adults?
It's a very good balance. Even if something is plugged as children's event, it's kind of a family audience that turns up. You don't really have children left alone in a museum or in a gallery or at a festival.
Yes.
And so I pitch the same story to both levels,
Okay.
There is something that is focusing for the little ones, and at the same time you address the adults in the audience.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how often do you have workshops or events?
Events are very regular.
Okay.
If you take a look at my website, you'll see there's lots of regular activities going on. Workshops probably once a month, and there are a lot of training sessions that are ongoing with clients that engage my services that may not be open to the public.
Oh,
yeah.
all right.
So it's one of those things that
So do you see a lot of interest from the younger generation towards storytelling? Or?
I do. I teach storytelling to performing arts students at LaSalle College of the Arts.
All right.
I have done so for the past 5 years.
Oh, that's great.
Yes. And my course is special because they graduate and they are assessed and evaluated with a final performance
Oh,
when
wow.
they have to stand and tell a story, perform to a live adult audience.
Okay.
And so, after all these years of working with young people between the ages of 16 to 24, roughly, I have a lot of students who've come back to me saying that they want to learn more, they want to do more, they want to do what I do.
Okay.
And so I have the Young Storytellers Moonshadow Stories program where I'm mentoring them.
All right.
And I work with them and train them and find places and platforms to get them to perform in public.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of ongoing activities, monthly things that happen where the young storytellers are the storytellers.
Oh, your students perform.
Yes, and some of them are no more students, they've graduated.
Oh, that's
So
great.
it's really good to see both young men and young women in the industry wanting to work with stories.
Could you tell me about the challenges that you face sometimes during this?
I think the biggest challenge or biggest misconception even now is that people think I read aloud from a book.
Oh.
And so I have to tell them that that's valid, that's great, reading aloud from a book. But as a storyteller, I also tell the story without a book.
Okay.
And
So do
I
you
can
enact the scenes?
I don't have to dramatize.
Okay.
I can just tell them a story using my voice, using my facial expression, my hand gestures, and a little bit of audience participation and interaction to make it lively.
Okay.
I can, of course, include props and visual aids and other things. If I really wanted to do a very elaborate production, I could have a visual artist with projections. I could have dancers, live musicians.
Wow.
So it really depends on what the event or the client wants and what the purpose is. But I think the best form of storytelling is just without all the frills. You just tell and you take your audience on a magical journey using just your voice and the power of the story.
Could you tell me something about your memorable experience through this journey?
I probably have quite a few.
Okay.
The usual ones are really people from the audience, especially little ones, coming up and hugging you tight and not wanting to let you go and saying, "Can I come with you?" And I was in Wales recently for a very big storytelling festival, and I was doing the Ramayana in an art gallery with different images of different episodes of the epic. And there was this little girl who came up to me and was holding on to me and smiling and wouldn't let go. So, those memories you keep with you.
Yeah.
And I've traveled a lot for my storytelling work, and I've been blessed to go to places as far away as Shillong in Meghalaya.
Wow.
And the organizers took me to the sacred forest.
Okay.
And all the legends from the Khasi tribe, the stories
Okay.
that, of the people there, everything came alive just being in that space
Yeah.
and, just going out into nature and traveling hours and hours to get into the forest and seeing the incredible, these old living trees that created this living roots bridge. So,
Okay.
so you have trees on either side and the roots have, intertwined and
to
create
make
a
a bridge.
beautiful bridge.
Okay.
And that bridge features in the story of, how Rooster brought back the sun. And for me to see that bridge and walk around there and, these are memorable things that, you keep inside.
Okay, as you said, this is a rare profession. Like most of them, they take it as a hobby. How do you take it as a full-time profession?
I think the decision I made when I went into storytelling was that to do storytelling and only storytelling for a good number of years, at least a decade.
Okay.
And so it meant to put yourself out there as an individual artist, to work with the public, ticketed, paying performances, not
Okay.
just free,
Yeah.
and to organize these productions yourself,
Okay.
and then to create a fan base.
Okay.
So people come again and again because they know this is what they get, this is what Moonshadow Story stands for, this is what adult storytelling is about.
Yeah.
These are the kind of training opportunities or techniques or workshops they can get from us. And then, of course, being involved in the international circuit, attending conferences and festivals, and working in academia, working with, with all the schools and educational institutions, and bringing storytelling into that realm and showing them the applications, and also using storytelling in the community.
Yeah.
So I've worked with senior citizens.
Okay.
I've worked with them working with their memoirs, and then how to retell that as a mini performance.
Okay.
Worked with underprivileged children, worked
Alright.
with caregivers, and how to empower them using storytelling for whatever industry or realm or focus area that they are working in.
Alright.
And so it means that you're not just performing, you're also working in communities, you are training,
Yes.
you are empowering others, you are organizing and producing and directing events yourself, you're traveling and you're taking your expertise and you're sharing your work and your art form with other people. You begin to network and collaborate. And so that's what kept me busy
Okay.
and, as a full-time storyteller.
All right. So in Moonshadow Stories, is it just you, or do you have like someone else working with you? for
Currently, it's
storytelling?
just me. It has been
All
for
right.
quite a while.
Okay.
My very dear friend with whom I founded Moonshadow
Yes.
Stories, Verena Tay, is a full-time author.
Okay.
Yeah, and a very good editor.
Okay.
So she's been very busy doing numerous MAs and currently off to do her PhD.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's predominantly just me, but I work with my young storytellers. So there's a team, and there's opportunities for them to perform and for them to work and for them to do any public engagements that come up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you write stories, or or do you like narrate stories from books?
The stories are not necessarily from books. I
Okay.
mean, oral tradition, especially the ones that have been passed down by my grandfather, some of them don't even exist in a written or book form.
Okay.
Yeah. So I do read and research a lot,
Okay.
because the same story, there will be variations within the culture,
Yes.
and there'll be similarities or brother-sister stories in other cultures. So
Yeah.
I research a lot. So for that, I do read.
Okay.
But I don't memorize text and
All
then
right.
repeat that
Yeah.
text. So your question about do I write? Sometimes I have to write or put into written form,
Okay.
at least the outline or summary or the skeleton of the story.
Yes, yes.
Simply because the partner that you're working with, the client, the organization, would like to see the material.
Yep.
Or sometimes you have to apply for licensing.
Oh,
and so
okay.
you need some kind of text,
Yes.
for guidelines
Yeah.
and things like that.
Okay.
But I haven't really written and published, but it's something that is there that needs to be done and addressed. You have to find the time to do it.
Yeah, true. Okay. So how does your family support this? Like,
They do, incredibly. I mean, My sons are now in their teens,
Okay.
but they were really very young when I started.
All right.
And they were always part of the audience.
Yeah.
They were always part of rehearsals and they were part of meetings. They would be walking in and out.
Okay.
So they kind of know the community of storytellers that I work with.
All right.
My family has been incredibly supportive.
Okay.
And, you know, when you have nephews and nieces, it's just natural that you end up telling them stories and you become the aunt that's known to do that, at least when they were all much younger.
Okay.
Everybody's grown up now.
So are you like their role model or something?
I don't know whether I'm a role model, whether anybody wants to be a storyteller.
Yeah.
But hopefully to read and
Yes.
to be immersed in literature and to, you know, to think of the arts and the creative industries as a pathway, as a
Okay.
real serious career pathway.
Yeah.
Hopefully I've inspired them, that shown them that doing something considered alternative like
Yes,
this is viable and, you know, is very rewarding.
What do you have in store for the Indian audience here?
I do a lot of work for the Indian audience. I mean,
Okay.
for any audience that's interested in Indian culture and
Okay.
Indian oral history. I think I've been a regular at the Kala Utsavam Festival of Indian Arts,
All right.
organized by the Esplanade, usually in November of every year.
All right.
So in the past, I've done productions for family audiences that were commissioned.
Okay.
So there was Forest Fables, Tales of Mischievous Animals. Recently there was Hanuman, the tale behind the name.
Okay.
So these are big productions collaborating with musicians, visual artists and dancers. I tell stories in libraries that are from, you know, using Indian tradition.
tradition.
And in January this year, I collaborated with Art Walk Little India.
Okay.
And I proposed, you know, a concept where I wanted to do storytelling in a Hindu temple.
Okay. Wow.
And so we came up with temple tales.
Okay.
And in the Sri Veeramakaliamman temple. And over a couple of days, I was there telling stories to the public. Anybody could come into the temple.
Okay.
And stories of gods and goddesses, especially the gods and goddesses that were in the temple that people could go and see, like a mini tour with me. And we finished it off with a garland making activity that was sort of silent and meditative, and to recap the stories and also, you know, to show them the importance of just being in the moment and making something and taking it back with them.
Okay.
So there's lots of avenues, and of course the Indian Heritage Center with whom I've worked with in the past a lot.
Okay.
And all the stories that I've told there predominantly are, you know, from Indian oral tradition.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have anything to tell to the Indian parents, like, you know, like some stories that they should be telling their young children?
I think the usual questions I get from young parents are, you know, where do I find the stories? You know, we're both working, husband and wife. I don't have time to, you know, research. And so there's something that's still valid after all these years. I grew up with it as a child, you know, the Amar Chitrakada
Yes.
series of
Yeah.
mythology.
Yeah.
It's one of the best resources.
Okay.
And, you know, they're available online now. And you can order them and they ship anywhere.
Yeah.
And I have a huge collection of these little, you know, illustrated books. And I think it's a good way to, as a stepping stone, as an introduction into our mythology and legends and stories, accessible for any parent and
Yes.
children, of course, because of the amazing illustrations.
Yeah.
So tap into that as a resource.
Okay, sure. So what are your future plans now?
So future plans would be, you know, to keep on traveling for international festivals,
Okay.
to continue platforming my young storytellers. And also, I've recently got a studio space
Okay.
at Goodman Arts Center, which is
Alright.
way out in the east.
Okay.
And so to have ongoing programs and workshops and events for the public. And for me also to work on new works, you know, new
Yeah.
productions and new collaborations in there. So that would be some of the plans, and, you know, just continue telling stories and hopefully to get something written and published. You know, that's always been something I put down on 31st December to
best
do for
with
the
that.
next year.
So ma'am, I've heard that your roots are from Kerala. So
Yeah.
could you like tell us more about that?
My grandparents are from Kerala.
All right.
And on my maternal side, my grandmother was actually born in Malacca in Malaysia.
Oh, okay.
So that makes me like, you know, a third generation Indian that's been living in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
And my father and mother spent a good couple of their early childhood years, studying in Kerala.
Okay.
And my mom has very close ties with family back in Kerala. And I traveled when I was very young with my grandparents, and then
Okay.
subsequently later with my parents, temple
Oh.
trips and things like that.
Oh, that's great.
And parents, especially my father and my two brothers are very active in the Malayali community back in Malaysia.
Oh, okay.
They've contributed so much to education and culture, and it's a really close and tight-knit community. And I do miss that sometimes, being
Okay.
away and all that. But I grew up with that. I
Alright.
grew up with that with my very active parents who are really involved in the community.
Okay.
And being global citizens now, it's a challenge how to maintain that and how to recreate a lot of the things that we had in our childhood. So for me, it's simply through the stories.
Okay. So one thing, do you speak Malayalam?
I used to speak what they say Pacha Malayalam when I was young.
Okay.
Because of my grandfather, but it's been a good 40 years since I've put it into practice.
Okay.
Yeah, so I do understand my grandmother simply because of
Okay.
familiarity.
Uh-huh.
But if you ask me to speak, it would be a bit of a challenge. Yeah.
Something like one line?
പണ്ട് പണ്ട് ഒരു കാലത്ത്.
Oh, this is how you start your
And
story.
for the rest of it, you need to come and see me
Sure, that was good.
to hear the rest of the story.
Okay, ma'am. So I'm sure our viewers would be waiting to watch a short story snippet of yours. So could you please do something
English,
for them?
right?
Yeah, sure. That's fine.
A long time ago, in a valley of flowers where roses, jasmines, and marigolds grew, there lived an incredibly beautiful Apsara fairy monkey maiden, and her name was Anjana. You may have heard of her son, Hanuman, the great Hanuman of the Ramayana epic. But not many people know of Hanuman's story when he was young, when he was a little child, and how he got that name, Hanuman. Well, once upon a time, in that valley of flowers where roses, jasmines, and marigolds grew, Anjana, the beautiful monkey maiden, jumped from tree to tree to tree, singing and dancing, singing and dancing, singing and dancing. And way up high in the sky, Vayu, the god of wind, heard her beautiful voice. And Vayu came down, all the way down, 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 fast to that valley of flowers where roses, jasmines, and marigolds grew. And there he saw Anjana, the beautiful monkey maiden, singing and dancing.
What are the tips that you would like to give to young aspiring storytellers?
I think the most important thing is to have a repertoire. You cannot be telling the same story over and over again, especially in a very small community like Singapore where you have repeat audiences. Work on your repertoire, research, read, find out variations, and rehearse and practice with people that will give you real feedback.
Okay.
Critical feedback is important to improve yourself as a performing artist, and to improve yourself as anyone working in the creative industries. Don't give up hope. It will be difficult in the beginning. Go find an audience. Don't wait for opportunities to come. Create the opportunity yourself. Start with voluntary work in places where they really need someone to come in to work with either children or adults.
Okay.
And that is an opportunity for you to try out, to practice, to test, and to see what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses, because you have a real audience and you will see the responses immediately. And from that you can build upon and improve yourself and sharpen your skills and brush up on all the areas that need to be worked upon. So I think my biggest advice to young people that come into storytelling is have a repertoire, do the research, and create your opportunities. Go out there and practice. It is an art form that you need a live audience.
Yes.
It's not like you practice music alone. You need a live audience because you have to interact with them, you have to participate, you need to create the eye contact with them. You need to figure out what ages will respond to what stories. And for that, your rehearsal sessions should really be with other people who are listening to you.
Could you tell us about your first experience as a storyteller?
Probably when I was a child, with my family and friends, And I think my aunt has an audio cassette recording of me again telling stories and speaking in Malayalam and in English. This is all with my grandfather. Then, of course, in schools, as part of curriculum, as part of competitions and performances in school.
Okay.
And then all the way to now, I don't think I've ever stopped telling stories.
Okay, so thank you so much, ma'am, and
Thank you.
all the very best for your future plans.
Thank you so much.
Thank
It's
you.
been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
സിംഗപ്പൂർ ചോയ്സിലെ ഇന്നത്തെ കാഴ്ചകളും വിശേഷങ്ങളും എല്ലാവർക്കും ഇഷ്ടപ്പെട്ടു എന്ന് കരുതുന്നു. അപ്പം നമുക്ക് അടുത്ത ആഴ്ച വീണ്ടും കാണാം.